The Galactic Survival Academy's final examination. 30 brutal days on a Class 4 death world. No technology. No weapons. Just you, the wilderness, and whatever makeshift tools you can cobble together from rocks and sticks. The goal? Simply survive. Don't die. Don't quit. Last the full 30 days and you pass. Now, across the galaxy, this exam has a 73% failure rate. Most species tap out by day 5. The proud Krillian warriors? They usually break by day 12, after their exoskeletons start cracking from the humidity. The highly evolved Zenthri? They're intellectually superior, sure, but they've never gone more than 18 days without their climate-controlled pods. Even the reptilian SSK Tar, who pride themselves on their survivalist heritage, average about 21 days before the local parasites become too much to handle. But then there's the human, Jake Morrison, 26 years old, former Eagle Scout, grew up in the backwoods of Montana. And on day 30 of the examination, when the proctors finally arrived to extract the survivors, they found something that made the examination board question whether they'd sent their monitoring drones to the correct coordinates. They didn't find a human huddled in a makeshift shelter, covered in mud and insect bites, barely clinging to consciousness like every other species. No, they found a 2-story wooden lodge with a covered porch, a stone fireplace with a functioning chimney, and a hand-carved sign that read, Morrison's Wilderness Resort and Spa. And Jake? He was sitting in a rocking chair he'd built himself, sipping something that looked suspiciously like tea from a clay mug, wearing clothes he'd apparently woven from plant fibers. He wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. He looked better than he had on day 1. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Jake wasn't alone. Sitting around what appeared to be a communal dining table made from smooth logs were 3 other examination candidates. A Krillian named Zekthar, a Zenthri called Iridis, and a SSK Tar who went by Sral. They were supposed to be scattered across different sectors of the wilderness zone, each surviving solo in their designated quadrants. Instead, they were here, Jake's resort. And according to the monitoring logs the proctors frantically reviewed, they'd been here for weeks. Not as prisoners, not as allies pooling resources, as paying customers. The Krillian was relaxing in what Jake called the mud baths, specially designed thermal pools that regulated his body temperature perfectly. The Zenthri was inside, apparently napping in a hammock suspended in what Jake had designated as the quiet room, with walls insulated by packed moss that dampened all external sound. And the SSK Tar was sitting on a sun-heated rock platform, positioned to catch maximum UV rays, with a small pile of what looked like dried fish beside him that he was methodically eating. When Proctor Velnoth, a no-nonsense Arcanian administrator who'd overseen this examination for 42 cycles, landed her shuttle and approached the lodge, Jake stood up from his rocking chair, smiled, and said something that would become legendary in Academy history. Welcome to Morrison's. You're not here for the survival exam, are you? Because if you're looking for accommodation, I'm afraid we're fully booked for the season. But I can put you on the waiting list if you'd like. Velnotha's mandibles clicked in confusion. She looked from Jake to his guests and back again. Her secondary eyes scanned the property, taking in the vegetable garden, the rainwater collection system with what appeared to be a filtration setup, the smokehouse, the outdoor cooking area with multiple fire pits, and what she could only describe as a primitive but functional shower system that used solar-heated water. Candidate Morrison, she said, her translator struggling with her tone. What is all this? Jake's smile widened. Well, ma'am, I figured if I was going to survive for 30 days, I might as well be comfortable. And once I had the basics set up, shelter, water, food, I realized I had a lot of time on my hands. So I improved things. Then these folks started showing up, looking pretty rough, and I thought, Jake, you've got extra space, you've got resources. Why not help them out? Of course, nothing in life is free. They're paying in labor, barter, and future favors. Fair exchange of value. Velnoth stared at him. In all her years administering this examination, she had never encountered anything remotely like this. The examination was designed to push candidates to their absolute limits, to test their ability to survive alone in the harshest conditions. Jake Morrison hadn't just survived. He'd built a business. And that's when things got really complicated. The examination board convened an emergency session within 6 hours of the discovery. Proctor Velnoth stood before a semicircle of holographic projections representing administrators from across the Galactic Survival Academy. The mood was somewhere between outraged and baffled. "Let me understand this correctly," said Administrator Threk, a towering Ergalian whose species had pioneered wilderness survival techniques 3,000 years ago. Not only did this human exceed all survival metrics, but he also managed to recruit other candidates into some sort of primitive commercial enterprise? Velnotha's report floated in the center of the chamber. "That is correct, Administrator. Our investigation shows that candidate Morrison established his base camp on day 3. By day 7, he had constructed what he calls the main lodge. By day 12, he had made contact with candidate Zekthar, who was struggling with the planet's humidity. Morrison offered shelter in exchange for assistance with heavy construction." "That's collaboration," squeaked Administrator Plix, a small Quarian who vibrated with indignation. "The examination explicitly prohibits cooperation between candidates." "Technically," Velnoth said carefully, "the rules prohibit cooperative survival efforts." Morrison maintains that he wasn't surviving with them, but rather providing services to them through a transactional relationship. His words were, "I was running a business. They were customers. Completely different thing." The chamber erupted in overlapping translations as the administrators argued. Velnoth waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. "There's more. We interviewed the other candidates. Zekthar reported that when Morrison found him on day 12, he was suffering from severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. Morrison provided water, shelter, and cooling mud baths. In exchange, Zekthar helped construct the second floor of the lodge and a defensive perimeter fence." "And the Zenthari?" someone asked. Candidate Iridus encountered Morrison on day 16 while fleeing from a pack of local predators. Morrison scared off the creatures using fire and noise tactics, then offered Iridus sanctuary. The Zenthari paid for accommodation by using their advanced memory to help Morrison map the local flora, identifying which plants were safe to eat, which had medicinal properties, and which could be used for textiles. The SS Katar? Sral actively sought out Morrison on day 19 after hearing rumors from Iridus during a brief radio check-in that was within regulation guidelines. Sral was covered in parasites and starving. Morrison had developed an extraction technique for the parasites and had established a smoking operation for preserving fish. Sral paid for treatment and food by teaching Morrison advanced hunting techniques and helping construct fish traps in the nearby river. Administrator Threk leaned forward. So Morrison wasn't just surviving. He was identifying problems other species faced in this environment and monetizing the solutions. Essentially, yes. A long silence fell over the chamber. Finally, an elderly Vexnori administrator named Karath spoke, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The purpose of the survival examination is to test a candidate's ability to adapt, problem-solve, and overcome adversity in extreme conditions. By that metric, hasn't Morrison demonstrated these qualities far beyond any previous candidate?" "He broke protocol," Plix insisted. "Did he?" Karath countered. "The rules state candidates must survive 30 days in their designated zones using only natural resources. Morrison did exactly that. The rules prohibit requesting outside assistance. Morrison didn't request assistance. He purchased labor through fair exchange. The rules prohibit technology above a certain threshold. Everything Morrison built could be classified as Stone Age technology at best." Velnoth nodded. "Our legal analysis team has reviewed the regulations extensively. Morrison technically violated no explicit rules. He interpreted the examination requirements in a manner that benefited himself while simultaneously helping others through voluntary exchange." Threk's laugh rumbled through the chamber. "The human weaponized capitalism against a survival exam. I've seen everything now. So what do we do?" Plix demanded. "Pass him? Fail him? This sets a dangerous precedent." Karath smiled. "I propose we do exactly what our regulations require. We evaluate whether Morrison demonstrated superior survival skills, adaptability, and problem-solving abilities. And I think we all know the answer to that question. But before anyone could vote, Velnath cleared her throat. There's one more thing you should know. We conducted exit interviews with all 4 candidates. Each one wants to file a formal request. What request? They want Morrison to be their team leader for the Advanced Combat Survival course next cycle. Apparently, they've already signed contracts. The examination board demanded to interview Jake Morrison personally. He arrived at the hearing chamber 3 days later, transported from the wilderness planet to the Academy's orbital station. When he walked into the room wearing his Academy trainee uniform, clean-shaven and looking remarkably refreshed for someone who'd just spent 30 days in a death world, the assembled administrators studied him with undisguised curiosity. Jake stood at attention in the center of the chamber, surrounded by holographic projections of some of the most prestigious survival experts in the galaxy. He didn't look nervous. If anything, he looked excited. "Candidate Morrison," Korath began, her ancient voice gentle but probing. "We've reviewed the reports, examined the evidence, and interviewed your clients. But we'd like to hear from you directly. In your own words, explain what you were thinking." Jake nodded. "Thank you, Administrator. I guess I should start by saying I didn't set out to break any rules. I just approached the exam the way I approach any challenge, by trying to do more than the minimum." "Explain," Threk rumbled. "Well, sir, the examination parameters were clear. Survive 30 days using only natural resources found in the environment. When I landed and surveyed my zone, I realized something important. I wasn't just in a survival scenario, I was in an environment rich with resources. Timber, clay, water, game, edible plants, everything I needed not just to survive, but to thrive." He began pacing slightly, warming to his subject. "On Earth, my homeworld, humans have a saying, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. So I asked myself, what does right look like? Just scraping by for 30 days, miserable and hungry? Or actually improving my situation systematically?" "So you built a luxury resort," Plix said dryly. Jake grinned. "I built efficient shelter with proper climate control. I established a sustainable food system. I created comfort, yes, but comfort based on sound survival principles. Every luxury, as you call it, served a practical purpose. The mud baths? Thermal regulation and parasite prevention. The quiet room? Proper rest is essential for survival. The sun platforms? Vitamin D synthesis and morale maintenance." Velnath interjected. "And the other candidates? That wasn't part of the examination parameters." "With respect, Proctor, it wasn't prohibited either. When I encountered Zekthar, he was dying. I had resources he needed and capabilities to help him. He had skills I could use. We made a trade. That's not charity, that's efficiency. 2 individuals surviving separately are vulnerable. 2 individuals trading specialized skills and resources. That's strategic thinking." "But you charged them," Administrator Plix pressed. "You demanded payment." "Of course I did," Jake said simply. "Free handouts breed dependency. Fair exchange creates partnership and mutual respect. Zekthar wasn't diminished by trading his labor for my shelter. He was empowered. He learned construction techniques his species never developed. Iridis provided botanical knowledge that probably saved my life 3 times. Sral taught me hunting methods I'll use forever. Everyone gained more than they gave." Korath leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Tell me, Morrison, what do you believe is the true measure of survival skill?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Not just staying alive, Administrator. Any animal can hide and hope for the best. True survival skill is about improving your circumstances despite limitations. It's about seeing opportunities where others see only obstacles. And it's about recognizing that humans, most species, really are social creatures. We evolved to cooperate, trade, and build together. Isolation isn't our natural state." The chamber fell silent. Finally, Threk spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You transformed a survival examination into an economic system. That's either brilliant or completely insane." Jake smiled. "Sir, on Earth we have another saying, why not both?" Despite herself, Velnoth chittered in amusement. Candidate Morrison, you've created quite a dilemma for us. You've technically passed every requirement, yet you've done so in a manner no one anticipated. Some might say you found a loophole. Respectfully, Proctor, I'd say I found the point of the exercise. You don't want survivors who just barely make it through. You want survivors who excel, who adapt, who find creative solutions, who turn problems into opportunities. He paused. You want people who don't just survive the wilderness. You want people who make the wilderness work for them. Korath smiled, a rare expression that made several junior administrators gasp. Candidate Morrison, you're either going to revolutionize survival training across the galaxy, or you're going to give us all headaches for the next decade. Again, ma'am, why not both? The deliberation took 3 days. Jake spent that time in guest quarters aboard the station, watching through the massive viewport as the wilderness planet rotated slowly below. He wondered if his resort was still standing, or if the Academy had dismantled it. He hoped they'd left it. Maybe future candidates could use it. On the 3rd day, Velnoth arrived at his quarters personally. The board has reached a decision, Candidate Morrison. Please follow me. They walked through corridors filled with candidates from dozens of species, all at various stages of their academy training. Jake noticed the stares, the whispered conversations that stopped as he passed. Word had spread. He was either about to become a legend or a cautionary tale. The hearing chamber looked different this time. The lighting was formal, ceremonial. All the administrators were present not as holograms but in person, a rare occurrence that signaled the importance of the moment. Korath stood at the center of the semicircle. Candidate Jake Morrison, you have completed the 30-day wilderness survival examination on designation planet Krell 7. The board has reviewed your performance, your methods, and your results. We have also reviewed 42 years of examination precedent and the foundational principles upon which this academy was established. Jake stood at attention, heart pounding. The examination was designed to test survival capability under extreme duress. You not only survived, you prospered. You demonstrated advanced resource management, creative problem-solving, and strategic thinking. You identified and exploited opportunities that candidates from species with millions of years of evolutionary adaptation failed to recognize. Korath paused, and Jake could have sworn he saw the hint of a smile on her ancient features. However, you also did something unprecedented. You transformed individual survival into a collaborative ecosystem based on voluntary exchange and mutual benefit. This was not the intended design of the examination, but after extensive deliberation, we have concluded that it may represent exactly the kind of thinking the galaxy needs. Threk stepped forward. Morrison, the wilderness doesn't care about our arbitrary rules. Real survival in the field, during actual missions in genuine crises, requires exactly the kind of adaptive, opportunistic, creative thinking you displayed. You saw a problem and solved it. Then you saw more problems and solved those too. Then you monetized the solutions. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the chamber. Therefore, Korath continued, the board's decision is unanimous. You have not only passed the wilderness survival examination, but you have achieved the highest marks in the examination's recorded history. Congratulations, Candidate Morrison. You are now Specialist Morrison. Relief flooded through Jake, but before he could respond, Korath raised a hand. However, we're not finished. Your performance has raised important questions about our examination methods and our broader training philosophy. Accordingly, we are establishing a new position within the Academy. We're calling it Cultural Survival Specialist. The role will involve analyzing how different species approach survival challenges and developing training protocols that account for species-specific strengths. Velnoth stepped forward, her mandibles clicking in what Jake had learned to recognize as approval. You'll also be consulting on examination design, Specialist Morrison. We want to ensure our tests evaluate genuine survival capability rather than mere adherence to traditional methods. If other species have approaches we've overlooked, we need to know about them. Jake's mind raced. So I'm not just graduating? You're offering me a position. We're offering you a career, Threk confirmed. teaching others to survive by thinking beyond conventional wisdom, showing them how to see opportunities instead of just obstacles. And yes, occasionally running practical field exercises where you'll undoubtedly cause us massive administrative headaches while somehow staying within the technical boundaries of regulations. There is one condition, Karath added, her tone turning serious. You must write a detailed field manual documenting every technique you used during the examination. Construction methods, resource identification, trade negotiation principles, everything. We're calling it Human Survival Protocols. It will become required reading for all candidates. Jake nodded slowly, trying to process everything. He'd come to the academy hoping to pass a survival exam. Instead, he was going to reshape survival training across the galaxy. I accept, he said simply. On one condition of my own. The administrators exchanged glances. Which is, when the manual is published, can we include recipes? Because I developed a really good wilderness stew that I think the galaxy needs to know about. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the transport ship approaching Krell 7, the same wilderness planet where he'd built his resort. This time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 37 candidates from 12 different species, all about to begin their wilderness survival examinations. But things had changed since Jake's exam. The Academy had implemented what they were calling the Morrison Protocols, and the results were already causing heated debates across the galaxy. Beside him, Zekthar, now also a graduated specialist, clicked his mandibles in amusement. I still cannot believe they let you redesign the entire examination structure. They didn't let me do anything, Jake corrected with a grin. I just made some suggestions. Very reasonable suggestions. You convinced them to allow candidates to encounter each other intentionally. I convinced them that artificial isolation doesn't reflect real-world survival scenarios, Jake said. In actual crises, people, sorry beings, from different species often end up stranded together. They need to know how to cooperate or at least negotiate effectively. Plus, some species genuinely do better in groups. Iridis approached them, her luminescent skin patterns swirling with colors that Jake had learned to recognize as excitement. The candidates are asking questions about you, Jake. They've all read your manual. Let me guess. They think I'm either a genius or a cheater? Both, Iridis confirmed. Though several have already formed preliminary barter agreements before even landing. The Krillians are offering physical labor. The Zenthari are providing information brokerage. Even the solitary Drexali are discussing potential trade arrangements. Sral slithered up beside them, his reptilian eyes gleaming. You've fundamentally altered how the galaxy thinks about survival. My people have been studying your techniques. Did you know SSK TAR hatchling education now includes a unit called Human Resource Optimization? Jake felt a strange mix of pride and responsibility. When he'd built that resort, he'd just been trying to be comfortable. He never imagined it would spark a paradigm shift across galactic survival training. Velnoth entered the observation deck, her posture indicating she had news. Specialist Morrison, the examination will proceed as scheduled. However, I thought you'd be interested to know that we've received 843 applications for next cycle's examination. That's a 340% increase over last year's numbers. Why the surge? Jake asked, though he suspected he knew. Because you made survival look achievable, Velnoth said simply. For centuries, species have sent their candidates to these examinations expecting most to fail. It was seen as a brutal gauntlet, a trial by ordeal. You demonstrated that survival doesn't have to mean suffering, that intelligence and creativity can overcome physical limitations. That's inspiring. Jake looked down at the planet below. Somewhere down there, his resort still stood. The Academy had decided to leave it as a landmark, a testament to what one individual could build with limited resources and unlimited creativity. They'd even installed a small plaque. You know what's funny? Jake said quietly. I didn't do anything special. I just used basic skills that most humans learn when we're kids. Building shelter, purifying water, preserving food, trading with others. This is just how humans operate. Zekthar's laugh rumbled through his exoskeleton. That's what makes it remarkable, Jake. What's ordinary for humans is revolutionary for everyone else. Your species spent millennia surviving on a death world with no natural weapons, no armor, no claws or fangs. You had to become creative or die. Every human is a survival specialist by default. Threk's voice boomed through the observation deck's comm system. All candidates prepare for orbital drop. Specialists Morrison, Zekthar, Iridis, and Sral report to Monitoring Station Alpha. You'll be overseeing this cycle's examination from groundside observation posts. As they headed for the shuttles, Iridis floated beside Jake. What do you think they'll build down there? She asked. Will any of them match your resort? Jake smiled. I hope they exceed it. That's the whole point. I didn't set a record to keep forever. I set a bar to be beaten. I want the next human who takes this exam to look at what I did and think, that's cute. Watch this. Competitive species, Sral hissed approvingly. Cooperative species, Jake corrected. We just compete to see who can cooperate better. As the shuttle descended toward Krell 7, Jake looked out at the wilderness that had changed his life. Somewhere down there, candidates were about to discover their own limits and capabilities. Some would struggle, some would fail, but because of what Jake had proven, all of them would know that survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about innovation. 3 years after Jake Morrison turned a survival exam into a business opportunity, the Galactic Survival Academy published its comprehensive study on what they called the Morrison effect. The findings shocked the traditional survival training community. Examination pass rates had increased by 62% across all species. Candidate confidence was up. Psychological trauma from examination stress was down. And most remarkably, candidates were completing examinations with better physical health than when they'd started. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. But the effect went beyond examination statistics. Jake's approach had sparked a cultural shift. Species that had never cooperated began forming cross-cultural survival training exchanges. The Krillians taught other species their strength-based construction techniques. The Zenthari shared their knowledge archives freely. The SS Katar opened their hunting grounds for interspecies learning programs. Jake himself had become something of a legend. Humans across the galaxy cited his story as proof that creativity and adaptability could overcome any obstacle. Other species studied human survival methods with newfound respect, recognizing that a species without natural advantages had developed the most versatile survival toolkit in the galaxy. When interviewed years later about his famous examination, Jake was characteristically modest. I just did what made sense, he told the reporter. I saw resources, I used them efficiently, and I helped people who needed help while maintaining fair exchange. That's not revolutionary. That's just practical. But it was revolutionary, because Jake had proven that survival wasn't about being the strongest, the fastest, or the most evolutionarily advanced. It was about being the smartest, the most creative, the most willing to see possibilities instead of limitations. And that's a very human trait. Jake Morrison didn't just pass a survival exam. He rewrote the rules of survival training across the entire galaxy. He proved that sometimes the best way to survive isn't to endure suffering, but to build something better. To see opportunities where others see obstacles. To transform challenges into advantages. Because that's what humans do. We don't just survive hostile environments. We make them work for us. We don't just endure hardship. We engineer our way around it. And when we can't overcome a problem alone, we build systems that let us overcome it together. That's not just survival. That's civilization. If you enjoyed this story of human ingenuity conquering impossible odds, check out these other HFY tales where humanity's creativity shocks the galaxy.